Welcome to the Org Design Podcast. So good to have you along. Look, we'd love you to share a little bit about Evolve Leadership and your own journey becoming an org design practitioner, helping so many other organizations get their org structure right for where they're heading, their purpose, their mission, their values.
Great. Yeah, no problem. Firstly, thanks for having me, Tim and Amy, on the show. It's great to be able to share some thoughts, and certainly still lots of learning to come from me. But Evolve Leadership, we are an organisational and leadership development consultancy, fairly boutique, and we work across Australia and also throughout the US. We specialise in org design, obviously, is one thing, but also strategy, leadership development, and organisational culture development. For me, thinking about org design, it was something that I probably fell into more than sort of set out to become an org design specialist. What for me I love is I really love seeing leaders and their teams sort of discover and find their potential. I know that's a bit of a cliche word, potential, but I love seeing people and their teams and organisations go from where they are to where they could or where they should be, and fulfilling their sort of hopes and aspirations. So that for me has been a sort of a lifelong journey along the way. But it started at that sort of individual team level, organizational level. But what I recognized was that where we want to go and how we want to achieve success and what that looks like very much comes back to, well, what are the functions, what are the roles that people play in order to see that happen? And I read a great book, Michael Heider's Free to Focus, and the idea of people working in their energy. So where are people passionate and where are they proficient? And for me, it's then thinking about that at an individual level and then going, well, how are our organizational structures catering for that? How are they allowing for people to work in the places that give them energy and in the areas where they're proficient? And it's a great, I guess, premise to enter into org design is individual, team, and company-wide sort of success. And that's sort of how I think I landed into it, that mixture of culture, strategy, leadership, people, and then going into org design. I did some studies along the way as well, but lots of falling into it.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. So you did start to touch on how you approach org design, but I'd love to go back in time a bit and dig a bit more into falling into org design, and then eventually choosing to study, as you mentioned. But can you share us a little bit more detail about how you fell into what has been your personal experience of org design in the past?
If I'm honest, I'll be honest here. Can I also just mention how I think the production crew has done a fantastic job getting us all to wear khaki today. That was actually all by coincidence. It's quite funny. So I was doing a strategic planning piece for an organization, and, great mission, great purpose, great sense of vision. They were, a significant size, had gone through some challenges, had started to plateau. And so I was brought in to help with their strategy. And then on the back of that, it was then became this sense of, okay, well, what's Glenn going to do? And what's Tim going to do? And what's Amy going to do? And it's like, it was sort of around the wrong way. And rather than focusing on purpose, the focus was on personalities as it related to the execution of that strategy. And for me, it was that sort of defining moment in the middle of that piece to go, hang on a sec, guys, your structure has to support your strategy, not the other way around. We can't be thinking, well, we can only work with the personalities we have. We actually have to think about, okay, what do we need to do to achieve success, and what's the structure we need to have in order to deliver that? And for me, that's really then opened my eyes to getting the organizational design piece. And I don't think we called it that back then. But, org charts and getting all those things set up to go, hang on, we need to think about this differently. It's not about personalities. It's about ultimate purpose, vision, and success. And then what are the key or core functions that we need to deliver that? And then what are the roles and responsibility? And further functions needed within each of those areas in order to achieve that. So that was probably that defining moment for me. When I did my Masters of Business Leadership, we did organisational behaviour and organisational development and design in that through that studies, and that started to really reinforce for me the importance of organisational design in companies. So that's probably a little bit more.
Yeah, Glenn, super interesting that you actually started with strategy through to then kind of how that's well executed through an organization. What are the things that you've seen go wrong? Like, how do you, when you're walking into an organization, meeting with the CEO, board, and then the leadership team, what are the kind of symptoms you see that your spider senses start thinking, oh, I'm not really 100% certain that that the structure is serving what they're saying they want to achieve, or what are those things that you sense or see or understand to be the case that people could look at and see as symptoms maybe?
Yeah, well, it was again, just bringing back to a story. It was another client. It was actually a large not-for-profit client that had parachuted me in to deal with culture. So they had a significant culture issue, and this is one of the things that I think people often don't recognize is they see things like strategy and they see things like organizational structures, and they don't recognize the impact that they have on culture. So this particular situation, I was brought in to deal with a cultural issue. There was a toxic culture that was developing within the organization. And they were like, Glenn, come in. We want you to do they didn't say this, but along the terms of, we want you to do the full Kumbaya sessions. We want trust falls. We want all this stuff. We want the team working really well together because the culture is terrible. And I'm like, can I just talk to people for a bit? Can I just actually get a better understanding? And what was interesting was at the heart of the toxic culture was actually their org design and was their roles and responsibilities, was the fact that they would have people scrambling over jobs, multiple people doing the same thing, and then competing and fighting for the resources to get that done. And there wasn't clarity of structure. There wasn't clarity of accountability. There wasn't clarity of ownership of particular tasks that need to get done. And that for me was that recognizing that is going, we think about culture, and that's what I'm saying. That to me was the symptom, a toxic culture. That wasn't people that were evil people looking to make each other's life a living hell. It was actually people that were scrambling over roles and responsibilities. So after that deep listening exercise that we did, I actually stood back and said, guys, trust falls aren't going to do it. In fact, they're probably going to let people just fall on their head. This isn't going to work. Kumbaya around the fire, there's going to be people trying to push each other into the fire. That's not what we need to do. What we actually need to do is bring it back and get it to a place where we can get clarity of who's doing what. What do we need to do? Who's doing it? Who takes ownership? Who's accountable to who? And therefore led into an org design piece. So that was a symptom, was that toxic culture.
That's super
The
interesting.
other, yeah. Well, it was fascinating because it's not normally how you would get to that point of org design. Normally, org design comes from either it's we need to downsize, or we've got scalability issues, and they're more the typical aspects of it. But there are other symptoms as well as a company plateauing, and seeing that. So for me, if that company has got to a certain point and isn't growing, then I will have a look at that org design and go, well, tell me. Well, actually, I'll start with probably process. Talk to me about how, what is it you do? What are your products? How do you deliver those? What are the services? How are you then running that as a process? And then who's doing what within that? Where are the bottlenecks that happen within that? Is it a front end issue? Is it like a sales and marketing function issue? And is that the part we need to focus on? Is it the operations or onboarding where it hits that point of entry into the contract signed and they're delivering, and then all of a sudden it stops there? Is it the the ongoing serviceability of to that client. Does it hold to there? So actually looking at the processes and looking at their ability to scale, to grow is probably another symptom that I see. So just trying to think, culture, scalability, sustainability is another one. That people just being completely overworked and busting their ass trying to get everything done that's on their plate. And that often is also a trigger to me about, maybe this is an org design issue rather than whoever shouts the loudest gets the human resource. It's like, well, let's bring it back to looking at the structure itself.
Yeah. Glenn, let's say you get in that situation. We're sitting around the table. Me and Amy have brought you into our imaginary organisation. We're probably going to have to come up with a good one for these questions, Amy. So we'll have to think about that. But we've come up with an organisation that we've got you in. We've talked through the symptoms. You're like, hey guys, you've got an org design problem. Where do you even start on that org design journey? Glenn, what does it look like when you start? Like, okay, we're all in agreement that we have a structure problem, like who reports to who, what they do, where they do it. Maybe have an accountability misalignment, lack of clarity, as you talked about. What's the first couple of steps that you engage? You're like, where do we even start? Do we just start drawing on a whiteboard? Do we what's your? How do you tackle that?
Yeah, no, yeah, it's great.
At each other across the boardroom table.
That's right.
Sorry, apart from yelling at each other across the executive table that I need more resource and Amy's wrong, or Amy yelling at me saying,
No, I think there's for me, it always starts with listening. So I have this sort of philosophy, and what I do which is around sort of listen, learn, lead. So, you want to come in, and often people come in guns blazing, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, or, let me pull this textbook off here and open up the textbook and go, well, this is what best practice should be because the textbook says so. I often find the best way to start is to go and listen. Deep listening, go and meet with people, eyeball people, interview them, do surveys, however you gather that information to really understand what are the underlying issues that are going on here. Because what management may present or what the CEO may present may not actually be the case. A lot of the times they're onto it and they're switched on and they're good listeners themselves. So they're able to bring that narrative to the table to then work with. But often they don't. So deep listening is the first place I would start to try and look for sort of themes and patterns. And I'm thinking about one particular it was actually in the education sector. And it was a large school that was having some challenges in terms of its leadership structure, its organizational structure. And whilst the particular leader had some ideas on what they thought it could be, and had done some research, we actually started that process of listening and recognizing that some of the deeper issues were the two deep issues that came from that listening was communication, and it was also ownership of responsibilities. And there was this sort of scapegoating, blaming, making excuses. Like you said, it's Amy's fault or it's Tim's fault or it's Glenn's fault. And that lack of ownership and poor communication came out through that listening. So that then helped us to go, okay, well, whatever we do, and there was actually I think there was 8 sort of key findings that came through that deep listening. What that then allowed us to do is to then go, okay, well, whatever model it is that we design going forward, we have to ensure that it addresses as many of these challenges as possible. So we then went into the process of doing we did some research. What are some other models that it could look like? And we put together 3 different design options for what that organization could look like. And then we started to engage with the leadership, middle management, the board to go, hey, these are some of the options that we're thinking about. And this wasn't a cost-cutting activity. We weren't trying to get rid of FTEs in this process. This was about efficiency and effectiveness. So we then went about that process of of interacting those designs, the options with stakeholders, gathering their feedback, ensuring, working with the director of corporate services to make sure that, that it was all feasible and financial, and making that clear at the start that whatever we do, we have to ensure that this is, that this is going to be, it's realistic and it's doable. And then we went through that process of decision making around what the best option was. And then we started to work with that option and then started to fill that out in terms of roles and responsibilities and how that would change. And then that's just phase one, right? You guys know this. You do all the design you like. It's the change management process itself, which is equally as important in how you bring about that change. Does that make sense?
Me and Amy talk a lot, Glenn, about why do organisations end up needing to go through enormous restructures with institutional consulting firms that cost millions and millions and millions of dollars? Why couldn't they just make change when it's obvious more regularly? What do you think the hardest thing is for most organisations to make that change? Why couldn't the not-for-profit that you're talking about see those issues a year ago, 2 years ago when they first presented and just kind of naturally have that conversation and action a change path forward that's not as big as a big restructure or needing to completely reorganize their team to be more focused on performance and outcome? Why is that? Why do people shy away from change? Why is that change so hard? Do you think?
The word that comes to mind is, I don't even know if this is a word, but institutionalization, I'm going to call it. And that's where structures get established and people, have that clarity of role and have that expectation on them. And then they go about their business, and there isn't the pace of change and the external forces coming on that organization and the internal focus and thought around org design doesn't exist. They're not correlated. So you've got all these external forces which create this need for change, and we know that change is everywhere. It's the only constant, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got all this pressure to change, but internally there isn't the freedom or the agility to be able to change quickly in that because of this institutionalization. We've been doing this for 10 years this way. So what's that going to mean for my role? There isn't a fluidity to who does what, when they, how they do it, that people get very fixed. And then you have habit, and we know the power of habit. So then habits get entrenched within lives that were all a result of our individual habits, but that's the same at an organizational level. So those habits they just lay a cement on cement on cement, and all of a sudden you're stuck. Because you that's just how you've learned to operate. So I think the lack of focus, and you mentioned it before, Tim, about we've got to go get in spend millions of dollars to do this restructure. My personal thought is organizations actually have to start to learn to do org design themselves. It's not for the big five consultancy groups to come in and charge millions of dollars, because change is happening so fast that we actually need to be able to respond to that as quickly as we can. Then they will find themselves being entrenched in a structure that finds it difficult to change because a lot of effort goes into it. Whereas if you can create a level of, as I mentioned, the word fluidity, then it allows you to go, you know what, we're going to test this. We're going to test this model, see how it goes. We're going to create feedback loops, and we're going to check in at 3 months and then 6 months and then at 9 months. If we need to make changes at any one of those points, then we can. And I think, speaking on change, my two favorite authors on change are, John Cotter. We're all familiar with his 8 steps to change and create a sense of urgency and a powerful coalition, blah, blah, blah. But another one is Peter Senge, who speaks about the learning organization, which you would have heard. He actually penned that term. And he talks about change is a process, but change is a culture. So how do we create cultures of change that allow us to move and go, okay, this isn't working. We're missing something here. Again, with our organizational purpose, vision and strategy leading the charge, what aren't we delivering and how do we need to modify our org design in order to achieve that? Now, again, if every time you have to do that, you have to bring in a consultant, then then it's very ineffective. Well, it's costly and can slow things down versus developing that skill internally through maybe your people and culture division or you're at that executive level so that they figure out that we actually can control this and we can manage this ourselves. So I think creating a culture of change, having a really clear process for change, as well as the two ways to help mitigate that and move from the design phase into the implementation of that new design. But if we think that happens once and it's like, okay, let's revisit this in 5 years, then I think companies get stuck.
So
But that's what they do.
You've hit right at the heart of the mission of the Org Design podcast, and that's making org design a key skill for leaders in every organization. If you could click your fingers right now and we could give every leader one skill related to org design, what would that be for you? What do you wish every leader could do?
Whoa. I wish, I'm going to call it this, play the video. So play the video, playing the video. And the idea there is we often, as leaders, we're thinking so focused on the now and we've got inefficiencies, we're ineffective. How do we fix that? That's important that we address that. But one thing I'd love leaders to be able to do is to play the video, which is going, what does this mean for 6 months from now? What does this look like for 3 years from now? And how do we build a scalable, sustainable and profitable business model so that we know, so workforce planning is probably another, word if people could know that word. But play the video so that that if we are going to grow and if we are going to achieve our vision, then what does that need to look like and how does our model support that? And what's our workforce planning going to look like, not just now in order to deal with our inefficiencies and ineffectiveness, but also for the future growth that we want to achieve. So that when revenue hits this and pipeline hits this, we know we need to make this decision, and when we need to make 3 of those decisions, we then need to know there's another decision to make as it relates to that scalability of the company. So play the video would be my one thing. See if I could gift that to all the organizations that I work with and all that you guys do as well. That would be it. The ability to think into the future and to ensure that the design that they have doesn't just work for now, but works for the next, season ahead.
So if, you have a manager sitting with you today and they're like, all right, Glenn, I want to play the video for my business. What would that look like in 3 quick steps?
Yeah, great. Well, I can remember working with an architectural firm, and they had they were a strong company already, and they wanted to grow. They had an appetite for growth, and so I said, so tell me about your growth. Tell me about your growth ambition. And then we were able to look at, okay, well, if you're wanting to grow, let's say by 30% over the next 2 years, what does that model look like from an org design perspective currently? So we had worked out and we had set them up into these pods. So they had architects and they had planners and they had project managers who were part of that and created these little pods. And we knew that each pod could be accountable for $5 million sort of worth of revenue. So in order to then think about that future growth, to go, okay, if we want to grow by 20 million, let's say over the next 2 years, then we know that we need to be working out a model where we just need more pods, and each pod that we have, which we know can generate and manage that 5 million of revenue for each pod. When we have 3 pods, we know we need a new account director who can then manage that pod, and for each account, and therefore you've sort of set up an equation when A plus B equals C, then we do D. So starting to think about that from a business strategy revenue perspective, and then thinking, right, well, what's the model, the scalable model that we know, and we know what's variable and we know what's not. We know that every job needs this, and this. So we need to be able to factor that into the roles, responsibilities, functions of the company, and then project that out over time.
You mentioned, you go in as a consultant really to these companies. You're not specifically there for org design. I'd love to know what percentage of the time does it end up with an org design component? So you said it could be cultural and execution or sustainability. How often in your clients do you end up doing org design?
The majority of the engagements, the majority of engagements that I have would at some level visit org design. And it could be just the question, and you can do that at the top level and look at the staffing ratios, and you can look at revenue and revenue per staff member, and there's things at that level. But I would say each would have some level of engagement with org design. Might just be, do you feel like your structure's working? What's your culture like? What's the what's the profit like? What's the culture like? And looking at the soft and hard figures of sort of business health. I can't imagine that there's ever been a time, I'm just trying to think, where I haven't asked, what does the design look like? How are you structured? I remember this thing called the anatomy of organizational performance. And it was this sense of how do you do what you do? How does work flow through your business? And how do you structure your business to deliver success? I would say I would ask that question nearly all the time. Nearly all the time. Amy is my answer. I don't just need to take the scene. Need to take this to get there. But yeah.
You're with Tim Brewer and Amy Springer on the Org Design podcast with our guest, Glenn Bergsma from Evolve Leadership. Glenn, it's been a privilege have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time and humility to come and talk to us about org design and the things that you see go on behind the scenes. Also, for people who would like to get in contact with Glenn or have him help out in the niche areas where he helps people with both strategy and, by the sounds of it, almost always some interaction with how they've structured their organisation. We'll have Glenn's contact details on our website with the podcast. But thanks so much for joining us, listening and learning as it relates to your org design skills as a leader. And it's a pleasure to bring people like Glenn on the show and have them share their expertise with us and with our audience. Amy, thank you so much as always for joining me, challenging me and having fun as we get to interview such great leaders and practitioners and working together to share that kind of knowledge so people can build better places to work.
Thanks for having me.